The floodplains of the Paraná River in South America are incredibly crowded. Down in the loose soil and leaf litter, dozens of insect species are locked in a perpetual, hyper-competitive struggle for territory and resources. Look closely at one of the residents here, the Argentine ant. Measuring just 2 to 3 millimeters long, it has weak mandibles and lacks the heavy armor or venomous stingers of its local rivals. In this environment, it's a distinct underdog. Yet this exact same insect currently rules an empire that spans 6 continents. Across the globe, billions of these physically unimpressive ants operate as one continuous, highly cooperative network. They've established sister locations in California, Europe, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia. Together, they form a single interconnected megacolony, the largest society on Earth, outnumbering even us. How did a tiny insect that routinely gets pushed around in its native South American dirt manage to bypass its biological limits and conquer the rest of the planet? The answer starts with human infrastructure. As we built global trade routes, moving timber, agriculture, and supplies by sea, a few Argentine ant queens hitched a ride as stowaways on our cargo ships. When they disembarked in places like New Orleans or the Mediterranean coast, they stepped into a completely different ecosystem. For the first time in their evolutionary history, they were free from the specialized predators and aggressive rivals that kept them in check back home. Without those threats, they defaulted to their primary survival strategy: sheer, overwhelming numbers. Unlike most ant species that rely on a single queen, Argentine ants maintain a ratio of about 1 queen for every 120 workers, allowing them to rapidly produce millions of offspring. Normally, biology puts a hard limit on this kind of growth. In their native habitat, as colonies expand and establish new outposts, their DNA naturally mutates over a few generations. Those genetic changes cause neighboring colonies to recognize each other as distant, unrelated enemies, triggering constant territorial wars. Because of that high genetic diversity, their native ecosystem is locked in a violent stalemate. No single colony can ever grow large enough to achieve total dominance before fighting its own cousins. But the boat trips broke that mechanism. Because only a tiny, random fraction of queens survived the long ocean voyages, the newly established foreign colonies passed through a massive genetic bottleneck. They arrived with almost zero genetic diversity. To compound the issue, introduced Argentine ants exhibit a bizarre behavior. They systematically execute up to 90% of their own queens every single year. This extreme annual culling strips out whatever tiny bit of genetic variation might have naturally developed. This creates a critical biological glitch. When worker ants leave the main nest to expand into new territory, they no longer accumulate enough genetic differences to trigger their natural aggression. Instead of recognizing their neighbors as enemies, they read the identical chemical signatures and treat them as family. They cooperate. This rare anomaly is called a supercolony, a system where physically separated, distant outposts operate in perfect harmony as a single, unified military force. By inadvertently removing the genetic diversity that forced them to fight each other, human transport allowed the Argentine ant to scale its population exponentially without internal conflict. With unlimited reinforcements, their expansion is brutal. In battle, Argentine ants wipe toxic, irritating chemicals onto physically superior native ants to mark them. Then they simply wash over their targets in endless waves, grabbing limbs and pinning them down until the larger insects are exhausted and dismantled. The ecological toll of this swarming is devastating. In places like California, the advancing supercolony has successfully overrun and replaced 90%. While protecting pests and removing native scavengers, the supercolony destabilizes the foundation of the local food chain, eventually ravaging human agriculture and devastating crop yields. But an empire built on a genetic loophole can only stretch so far. After decades of global reign, time and vast territorial expansion are finally allowing new genetic mutations to take hold, causing the megacolony to fracture from the inside out. Across California, merciless civil wars have broken out. Factions like the Lake Hodges supercolony are now clashing with neighboring groups along highly dynamic front lines that stretch for kilometers, racking up an estimated 30 million casualties every single year. And while they fight among themselves, a new external threat has arrived. Human shipping has accidentally imported the red imported fire ant, a much larger, venomous rival that originally evolved alongside them in those same South American floodplains. In the southeastern United States, the old wars of the Paraná River have reignited on a foreign battlefield. The fire ants, whose major workers are twice the size and wield venom-injecting stingers, are heavily outgunning the Argentine supercolony, steadily exterminating them across the entire region. Human globalization created the ideal conditions for a tiny underdog to build the largest society on Earth. But as civil wars rage and ancient rivals arrive on their shores, the rebalancing the scales right beneath our feet.